what's up? Sanisa, Super Bad Estrada here, and I just want to give a huge special shout out to the relay. Thank you so much for all of the continuous support, and thank you for all of the support during and after and before every single fight.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. On the heels of her big win over Kim Clavel, Kim's neck of the woods, Canada, Jessica Neri Plata says, I want to fight Senicia Estrada in the United States.
She might. It all depends on whether or not she can win a rematch, assuming there is a rematch with Kim Clavel.
According to the WBA, Plata has her sights set on conquering the American market and landing a fight with Estrada. I would like to fight Senicia Estrada. We know it's a lower division, but that's a good thing to get to the United States.
Well, Jessica may not have to drop down in weight to get an Estrada fight, as Senicia plans on moving up.
Though not before she unifies the women's minimum weight division. Not before she gets both Tina Ruprecht and PlataValle in the ring.
She wants to do that first, get that out of the way, and then move up in weight. So at minimum, that puts a Jessica Plata fight out 2-3 fights.
Just about. Senicia Estrada will have learned her lesson about attempting to hold multiple titles at multiple weights. She moved up in weight and took on Japan's own WBO champion Tenkai Tsunami in the women's light flyweight division, and she was forced to vacate that title, forced to vacate that newly obtained WBO title on the premise of the WBO's rule.
They don't let any of their champions hold multiple titles at multiple weights. They force you to choose.
Senicia chose to hang on to her WBA minimum weight title, vacated the WBO up there at light flyweight. Very recently, the same thing happened with Valle, who I just mentioned. In her last fight, she moved up to light flyweight, became a unified champion up there, but quite abruptly vacated both titles that she won.
She won the IBF and WBO titles opposite the ring Argentina's Evelyn Bermudez. She won a points decision.
Became a unified champion, but the WBO put her on the spot the same way they put Senicia Estrada on the spot. Costa made the same decision that Senicia made. She decided to move back down to minimum weight, where she also holds 2 alphabet titles.
Her and Senicia have some unfinished business. All the girls do in the minimum weight division. All the champions.
PlataValle, Senicia Estrada, Tina Ruprecht, who Senicia is set to share the ring with in her very next fight on the undercard of Ramirez versus Comey.
Though for what it's worth, Senicia Estrada caught wind of Jessica's desire to share the ring with her upon Senicia's ascent to the women's light flyweight division, and she's happy to oblige her. She's open to the fight.
Though not before she becomes the minimum weight division's undisputed champion. She also addressed her old buddy, PlataValle, saying, blah, 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 Kaka, stay in the gym and keep trying to improve. You can have 10 trainers in your corner, and you still won't beat me. Hashtag Superbad, hashtag levels.
I have Senicia Estrada beating both Tina Ruprecht and PlataValle, provided that she shares the ring with both of them this year.
If she does, by that time, will Jessica Plata still be the light flyweight division's unified champion?
We are thinking several months into the future, perhaps an entire calendar year. We're thinking about a Tina Ruprecht fight. We're thinking about a PlataValle fight. Then Senicia would have to move up in weight. By that time, will Jessica still be in possession of those 2 alphabet titles?
If she is, and Senicia Estrada ends up sharing the ring with her, Senicia won't be in unfamiliar territory. She's already shared the ring with a hard-punching volume puncher at light flyweight in Tenkai Tsunami, for what was Tenkai's WBO title. Senicia Estrada is in many ways more well-equipped for a fight with Jessica than Kim Clavel was, because Senicia Estrada has the firepower, the artillery that Kim didn't have.
Kim Clavel's a good fighter, make no mistake, but she's not a big puncher, and she marks easy.
I firmly believe that Kim Clavel fought the wrong fight. If it were Senicia instead of Kim Clavel, I think she packs a more assertive punch and knows how to navigate the pocket a little better than Kim Clavel did.
Senicia's a switch hitter. She can fight out of the orthodox and southpaw stances. In the process, give Jessica different looks. Attack Jessica from different angles.
You have to remember that Kim Clavel got off a lot of her shots. She landed a lot of her punches. She just wasn't able to get Jessica's respect. Opposite the ring, Senicia Estrada, Senicia can land those same punches whilst being defensively responsible and perhaps do more damage, get more respect from Jessica than Kim Clavel did.
And make the in-fight adjustments that Kim Clavel didn't make.
Jessica Niri Plata is a tough customer. She went the distance with Jessica Tutibap, one of the bigger punchers, if not the biggest puncher, in the women's light flyweight division. And Jessica was unable to put a dent in Jessica Niri Plata. Opposite the ring, a younger fighter with speed and agility and athleticism of their own, and boxing acumen.
I very much like Senicia Estrada's chances against Jessica Plata.
She has dealt with this kind of fighter before, though I don't know here and now if that's how this is all going to shake out. We're several fights out from an Estrada versus Plata fight. We don't yet know if there's going to be a rematch between Kim and Jessica, and whether or not Jessica can repeat that performance.
What if she doesn't? What if Kim wins? Then it becomes a different conversation entirely.
So, I mean, it is a little bit too soon to start talking about Estrada versus Plata. A lot must come to pass before it comes to that, though I like Senicia's chances, for what it's worth.
Yeah, she can beat her.
In men's lightweight news, they finally decided to publish a number for Gervonta Davis's box office fight with Hector Garcia. It's reported to have done somewhere in between 200,000 and 225,000 buys. This is a very different number from Rick Glacier's more modest 61,000 pay-per-view buys. It's almost as if the people at Boxing Scene rushed to get this story out there.
In response to Rick's number, in response to the bad press that was garnering, because it would reflect poorly on Gervonta Davis's drawing power if the only number out there is Rick's number.
And up until recently, the only number that was out there was Rick's number. Try and understand. It's been approximately 2 weekends since Gervonta Davis versus Hector Garcia, and nothing semblant of a number was reported. It wasn't up until Rick Glacier reported, via his own sources, that the pay-per-view did a very modest 61,000 buys.
It wasn't until he put out that number that the people at Boxing Scene put out this number.
Via their sources, BoxingScene.com has confirmed that the 4-fight pay-per-view show that featured Davis' 9th-round technical knockout of Hector Luis Garcia on January 7th ultimately will produce somewhere in between 200,000 and 225,000 buys.
Did you catch that? Do you see the language? Do you see how they're trying to round up? They're trying to pull a fast one on you. They're trying to pull a fast one on me. It will produce somewhere?
It will. It will. How do you know it will? If it will, that must mean that it hasn't yet, which would put the number at a more modest figure than 200,000 buys. You're just guesstimating.
Estimating what it'll do.
And if I'm being honest, it took them long enough to do that. You know, following the Sean Porter versus Errol Spence Jr. pay-per-view, the following Monday, they produced a number. The following Monday, they already had a figure out there. They were in a hurry to tell everybody how well it did. Whereas with this pay-per-view,
they came out with the buy rate for Spence versus Porter in approximately 2 days. It took them approximately 2 weeks to report an even lower number for this fight.
You don't find that strange? You don't find that peculiar? They wait good up until Rick Glacier produces a figure of his own so that they can come out with this one via no verifiable sources.
Which is customary. That's how these things often happen.
That's how these stories are often reported. It's always via sources, insiders.
It's not an official press release, an official number, like what you got from DAZN when they released the figures for Canelo versus Golovkin 3. A number that has to be accurate, a number they have to stand by.
That was an official number. This one isn't. If you want to know how unofficial this number is, a Twitter account that goes by the name Fight Oracle made a stout observation. Remember, Boxing Scene is owned by Paramount Global, parent company of Showtime, and it's an article by quote-unquote Boxing Scene staff. No one would put their name on it.
Doesn't say it's from Jake Donovan, doesn't say it's from Manuka Kopiang. You don't know whose story, who exactly is putting out this information.
It's almost like nobody's in a hurry to attach their name to this story, as its credibility and accuracy is under question.
They don't want to be held accountable for what could be a bullshit number.
This looks like damage control. That's what it looks like. They didn't decide to publish this number. They didn't decide to publish this figure up until Rick decided to come out with his. Then they came out with this figure as a response to that in order to help Gervonta Davis save face.
That's what it looks like.
An article published by Boxing Scene staff, quote-unquote Boxing Scene staff. But who specifically came out with this figure? Who specifically wrote this article?
I mean, it's not uncommon common. It's customary for a journalist's sources to remain anonymous. They maintain a certain level of anonymity as to not be compromised. That bit of it, that's normal. But you know what's not normal? A journalist wanting anonymity.
You don't want the credit for the article you published? You don't want people to know that you're the one that wrote it? You're just gonna put it under a blanket title? Boxing Scene staff? There's a lot of people over there at Boxing Scene. Who specifically wrote this story?
You think they're running spin?
That's exactly what I think they're doing. They're running interference in order for Gervonta Davis to save face. They likely weren't going to put out this story. They likely weren't going to publish a figure of any kind up until Rick Glacier came out with that 61,000 and made everybody look bad.
Remember, Boxing Scene never published a story like this one in reference to the Isaac Cruz fight. Likely because they didn't have to. I didn't see Rick produce a number for that fight either.
So they didn't have to run interference that time. They didn't have to spin it. But this time, in light of Rick's 61,000 pay-per-view buys, they had to do something.
It's neither here nor there because whether it's 61,000 pay-per-view buys or as high as 225,000, let's round up.
Fuck it. Let's just go with the highest number. Even if I do. 225,000 pay-per-view buys in a country this size with this many people, a market this big. 225,000 pay-per-view buys still isn't the year mark of a star.
It's nothing.
Gervonta Davis has made approximately, 4 pay-per-view appearances, and he still has yet to crack 300,000 pay-per-view buys on his own. 300,000 pay-per-view buys off his name value alone, and he's not going to.
Not with these dance partners. Hopefully Ryan Garcia will change that.
He might. He has a decent-sized following of his own, though Gervonta Davis himself, he can't crack 300,000 pay-per-view buys with the likes of Leo Santa Cruz or Isaac Cruz or Mario Barrios, or in this instance, Hector Garcia. He needs a Ryan Garcia to help him sell it.
Not a Rolly Romero.
And not a Hector Garcia. He needs a Ryan Garcia to do real numbers because he himself can't do them on his own.
Does this mean the pay-per-view flopped?
No, it doesn't mean that the pay-per-view flopped. It looks like the pay-per-view was a nominal, emphasis on nominal success. They got these guys, they don't pay them much money to box Gervonta Davis, so the operational costs stay low and the break-even point is easier to hit. It's a success, albeit a mediocre success.
But I've said that before. That's the grift. That's the gimmick.
They don't want to put Gervonta Davis in risky fights with the likes of a Vasil Lomachenko, a Shakur Stevenson, or a Devin Haney because they threaten his mediocre success.
Let's round up. 225,000 pay-per-view buys multiplied by a price point of $75 brings you roughly $16 million.
Estimate that 40% of that $16 million goes to operational costs, the cable and satellite company. That's roughly $6.4 million.
That then leaves you with $9.6 million to pay the guys in the main event, the guys in the co-main, the guys in the undercard.
Tack on approximately $5 million in gate revenue, and it's a nice chunk of change for a pay-per-view that didn't cost much to put on.
And this is what you're making avoiding fights. This is what you're making not taking risks, not matching Gervonta Davis tough. So why would you want to match him tough?
You wouldn't. And they don't. That's why Floyd Mayweather, back when he was still in the Gervonta Davis business, that's why he said in plain English, Shakur Stevenson and Devin Haney should fight each other and leave Gervonta alone. Just let him do his thing.
That's what he said verbatim.
Now, do you see what I'm telling you? No, this kid's not a big superstar. He's not that big a draw, but he draws enough that they want to protect him.
And he draws enough that the powers that be likely paid someone at Boxing Scene to run this story.
Put out this number without being held accountable. Lest we forget, it's published by Boxing Scene staff. But who specifically in their staff wrote this thing?
Quite conveniently, it doesn't say.
And finally, ahead of this weekend's fight between Chris Eubank Jr. and Liam Beefy Smith, per a tweet from Michael Benson, Ben Shalom has claimed that Kell Brook wants to come out of retirement and fight the winner of Chris Eubank Jr. versus Liam Smith, saying he's desperate for the winner of that fight. He feels he wants the winner of this fight, whether that's Smith or whether that's Eubank Jr. I'm not at all surprised to hear it.
Before the Chris Eubank versus Conor Benn fight fell apart, Kell Brook was eyeing the winner of that fight last year.
Since then, I'd been hearing loose reports that Kell Brook was back in training, was back in the gym, Though, because he hasn't had a tune-up fight since his big win over Amir Khan early last year, you get the sense that he doesn't want to keep busy fight. He doesn't want a tune-up fight. He wants to go into a big fight straight away, because I'm sure that either Ben Shalom or Eddie Hearn would have been happy to accommodate him, happy to get him a tick-over fight.
En route to a big one.
So I'm not sure that Kell Brook even wants a tick-over fight, but that's not all, folks. Not only is Kell Brook eyeing the winner of Eubank versus Smith, he's also in the running for a Conor Benn fight, saying that fight was always there and is still there to be made.
This is very interesting.
I could see either fight taking place. I could see either fight happening. Kell Brook versus the winner of Eubank versus Smith, or Conor Benn straight away. Though I think the more adequate opponent choice would be Conor Benn.
Because Conor Benn, like Kell Brook, only fought once last year, and it's been a while since he saw action.
And because Conor Benn and Kell Brook are a bit closer in size to each other than Kell Brook and Chris Eubank Jr., Chris Eubank Jr. has campaigned as high as super middleweight. He'd likely want to fight Kell at middleweight,
where this weekend's fight is taking place.
Kell Brook really isn't a middleweight. He's more of a big welter or a junior middle, but not a full middle.
Not really, no.
I feel like Kell Brook's optimal weight, even at this stage in his career, would be junior middleweight. And Conor Benn versus Kell Brook at junior middleweight, that sells tickets. Hell, Kell Brook versus Conor Benn at middleweight sells tickets. But I do think Conor Benn is the more optimal opponent choice.
More so than Chris. For Kell, the Conor Benn fight is the more winnable fight because Conor Benn, he's greener than Chris Eubank Jr. and somewhat smaller.
Not as big a guy, perhaps not as big a puncher. He's been out of action a while. He's got some ring rust that he needs to shake off. If Eddie wants to make this fight, he needs to move fast.
Ben Shalom is likely to get that blank checkbook out as soon as Eubank versus Smith is over.
A bidding war for Kell Brook's presence and participation could ensue between Eddie Hearn and Ben Shalom. And if Eddie wants to get Conor Benn a big fight straight away, a big fight back.
He said something about revisiting the Eubank fight, potential Pacquiao fight. He even mentioned Terrence Crawford. I don't think he's going to put him in there with Terrence Crawford.
Kell Brook, for a guy who's been out as long as Conor Benn, it makes more sense. Kell Brook still has name value, but he's up there in age. He's in the twilight years of his career. He likely only has one more camp left in him for one more fight.
Maybe two if he beats Conor.
The Conor Benn fight is the much more winnable fight of the two. If you had to sequence these fights from...
You fight Conor, then you go see about fighting Chris, because he's not going anywhere.
You do it that way, because if you fight Chris straight away, you may not make it to a Conor Benn fight.
May not make it to the bag.
Chris might retire you, but Conor, you go into the fight with Conor, you go into that fight the hero due to all the negative press that Conor Benn amassed with that whole ped fiasco.
You know, you're a big guy, strong guy. You're definitely more experienced than Conor Benn. More fundamentally sound. You got a better jab than he does.
He's green. He's been inactive a while. It's a more winnable fight than the Chris Eubank Jr. fight. You do that fight with Conor as a box office fight on DAZN. Maybe you beat that guy. Maybe you fight Chris afterwards.
Maybe. Eddie's got to pay him, though.
He's got to pay him well, because at this point, Kell's in it for the money.
As if that wasn't obvious.